Servus and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 71. Continuing on here with our college university coach series, I would say. I should have started something on the side here to get it keep it going. But yeah, this week got a guy on who, funny enough, is from the town over from me in Oakville, Ontario, and he actually went to Oswego as well. So we're both Oswego alumni. We were talking off camera about the Bridge Street runs. For anyone listening who's been there, you would know that. The other ones, I'll let you know, it was just a very fun event. So he went on to have a career. As I said, he went to Oswego, so D3, and since then he's got into the coaching world. So he has been an NCAA. Now he's a head coach at Brock University. Funny enough, having him on now, he just had their most successful season in program history and won Coach of the Year. Happy to have on the Pro Hockey Pod this week, TJ Manastersky.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I'm excited.
We always kick this off the same way. As I mentioned, I believe you were born in Oakville, Ontario, or at least that's what Elite Prospect says. But like, what's kind of your earliest childhood memory of growing up in that area?
Well, actually, I was born in Toronto and grew up in Etobicoke up until kind of middle of elementary school. We moved to Oakville. Uh, some of those early hockey memories from Etobicoke would be they have all these outdoor rinks, like city rinks, and playing shinny. You just go there and you'd play under the lights. I'd be with my cousins, staying up later than I'm supposed to, and just playing outdoor hockey on these city rinks. And that's a fond memory of Etobicoke. And then Oakville was a much smaller community than it is today when I moved there, but just an awesome place to grow up and have friends and a sports community as well. I mean, it's certainly a hockey community, big baseball and and lacrosse and different things too.
It's funny you bring up the outdoor rink thing. I always like, same with me growing up in Peterborough. Those times don't really exist anymore because back then it always got cold in winter. It always had snow at Christmas. Like it felt like, this is outdoor hockey season, and we as kids really got to cherish that. And unfortunately, the kids today might not get it as much, at least in the GTA area. But what was kind of your minor hockey path? Like I was doing some research online, saw a couple of different teams. Like what was your minor hockey path growing up?
Well, I guess my early claim to fame was playing 4 years with Jason Spezza, and his dad was our coach, Reno. And what we did was we actually played double A for the Mississauga Braves, but we played a year up. So what would have been my would have been novice and minor Adam in those days. So I guess that's like U10 and U11 now. And I played 2 years with Jay, and then we repeated minor Adams. So I think that's U11. And we went and we played with the Marlies. Went to the Marlies after that. So I did a couple years there. Then I switched over to the Mississauga Senators before an illustrious 5 year career in the what was the OPJHL, now the OJHL, the Ontario Junior Hockey League. Uh, yeah, which kind of set the stage, for me to ultimately go to Oswego, as you mentioned.
Don't want to skip too far ahead there of your illustrious 5 year career in the OP or but I'm always curious, like, as I mentioned, we grew up in the GTA area. So as kids, and especially back then, there was really like one route that was favored more than the other. Like we had to focus on the OHL because there was so many teams in our area. As you mentioned, Spezza would have played for the Mississauga Ice Dogs. Like, so you see your friends and stuff go that route. Had you ever thought of going that route, or did it just kind of like the way it played out with your career by the time you were kind of maybe I wouldn't say late developer, but just how it played out, like NCAA made more sense? Because I'm very curious, like, why my guests choose whatever path they end up taking.
I was always somebody who wanted to go college hockey. I wanted to play in the NCAA from as long as I can remember. Of course, in your draft year in the OHL, it's so much hype in Toronto, and it overtakes everything. So you start thinking, hey, maybe that would be cool. I was not drafted, so it's not like I had to make a choice. So I just stuck with what I always wanted to do, which was to play college hockey. And I think part of that was the fact that growing up, my dad was coaching at York University, and I was around the university level hockey an awful lot growing up, and I just loved it. I love the idea of playing a sport for your school. and going, and that whole, scene with it. And of course, you see the crowds and all the rest of it in NCAA. It just looked like so much fun. So for me, that was pretty much always, the direction I wanted to go.
You ended up playing for one of the more known, I would say, tier two junior teams in the GTA there. Like when I made the jump to Cougars, everyone talked about the history of Streetsville. I remember playing that old small rink, but you made the jump, I believe, at 16. Like it's a big jump, especially back then. It was a different game. I would say maybe a little heavier. How was that adjustment for you at such a young age?
Well, yeah, looking back, I don't know if it was the right thing to do or not. Like I think it really pushed me as far as now I'm playing with guys that are up to 20 years old and in that respect, but you're kind of playing as a defenseman in that fifth, sixth defenseman role. So somewhat limited minutes. You're not playing in a lot of situations where, if I had to play U18, probably would have been, like playing on all the power plays and penalty kills and last minute and stuff like that. So I think that's an interesting development question to consider when deciding whether you should move up a level or not. When you still have eligibility at your current age group, like that's just a real something to consider. But I loved it. I felt I belonged, and I thought I had a reasonably good first year. It helped having a couple other Oswego alumni on that team. I don't know if you ever heard the stories of Mark Stroda, and so like this guy, just an absolute physical like beast. Like he would single-handedly break up a line brawl just by touching people on the shoulder. Like he was feared, and so he ended up going to Oswego, and so did Andy Rozak, who I think just got in the Hall of Fame at Oswego. He was on that team. Joe Caribs, probably in the Hall of Fame at Oswego as well. I should know that, but he was an All-American. Like these guys, Scotty Irwin, who ended up at Oswego. These are all guys a little bit ahead of me who played in Streetsville and went to Oswego. And so that's kind of my first awareness of Oswego, was seeing those guys go there. But yeah, no, Oswego, the old rink there in Streetsville, and Stan Kalapaka, the general manager, would sit up in his perch above the benches and just kind of chirp down at everybody, and it was a cool experience.
I always I always look back at junior and be like, man, I wish I'd played more years. Like I only played two, and I had a lot of good memories there, and it was a fun league. But you brought up a really good point. So I've talked about this with multiple guests about kind of the development thing, where you've said it was awesome to go play at 16 to play at the higher level, but you were put in a lower role as a sense because you were a young defenseman. And many people on have also said kind of what you mentioned, that, hey, maybe if I had stayed back the extra year to play in a more high end role, power play, penalty kill, stuff like that, it would have bettered me for the future. And I feel like when we were growing up, everything was about like the title, like what level you were at versus how many minutes you're getting on the ice. You know what I mean? Like, so kind of like to keep going on what you said. Like, would you say looking back, if you had stayed back and played whatever it was, midget, I believe U18 back then, another year, you think it could have helped you develop more?
Potentially, I think it could have refined some of my more offensive skills, which is something that I certainly could have used some refinement. So like that's a real thing. But I see it today too. Like I got two boys, one's playing U7, one's playing U8, and there's just this sort of peer pressure amongst players and parents and coaches and the whole hockey scene in the Greater Toronto area. That's kind of crazy, and it just pushes you to some situations that maybe aren't necessarily the best or most productive. And it's a interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, every summer I would come home and kind of witness some of that to an extent. Like for me, it would even stem back to kind of the off ice training. Like these kids are starting at such a young age with in the gym and stuff, and then you see them or hear about their routine every day, and like the parents be like, yeah, my son's doing this for 2 hours, then he's going here with this skills coach for 2 hours, then he's going here, and I'm just like, your son's like 11 years old, like let him be a kid, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like one of those things. Like I don't know if right now that's the right approach. But it's crazy how it's changed from our days. Like our days, as you mentioned, like you're gonna hone your skills. It was like you go to practice, and then as a goalie, maybe you have a goalie coach you see once or twice a week, and then it was like play outside on the pond. Like
Hmm.
that was your skills coach back then. You know what I mean? But kind of back to your career there. So as I said, you made the jump at 16 to Streetsville. As predicted, your second year, I would say, you know, you kind of have that confidence, you know what to expect in the league, and you end up improving in statistics, probably improving in ice time and everything like that. And then, like, just looking at your career, the last 3 years there, you played in Oakville, you played in Georgetown, like obviously two also very good organizations. They were always top teams when I played, and it could just for me when I look at it, it just seems like you kind of knew how to play, and you just became a consistent defenseman. Like every year, you put up similar points, and obviously played a lot of games for them. At this point during your career, like were you talking to D1 schools? Were you going on visits? Like how was the college recruitment going for you at this time?
My third year when I got to Oakville, I was named captain. So I was 18 years old and I was coming off, pretty good year in my second year. And then captain of Oakville, I think I was second in the league in D scoring that year in Oakville. And I started to get a little bit of flirting with some Division I teams, but nothing really that had any legs and didn't really go anywhere. And ironically, I had committed to go to Wilfrid Laurier to play after that year. All my friends at this time were figuring out where they going to university, right? Where are they going? And I was feeling like, okay, maybe left out a bit of that. So I decided, you know what, I'll go to Laurier. I know it's great hockey. I spent my childhood watching that level in the OUA and U Sports, and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I had some buddies going to Laurier. But then in the off season, what happened was Georgetown ended up buying my rights and trading for me from Oakville, and then convinced me to keep playing junior to chase the NCAA dream. And they were building a great team to try and compete for a championship. And so I ended up dropping down. I went part time to Laurier for the next 2 years while I played in Georgetown.
That that barn to me brings back memories. Like we had some great games there, and it was always packed. And um, I have to say, like today when I've gone to games, or like over the past couple of years, like whether it's Burlington or Georgetown or Oakville, like I don't know what it is, but I feel like the fan support has changed. Or maybe when we were just that young, we were so naive to be like, "Oh, it's 200 people, it's so full here." But like really, it's
I
I don't
don't know.
know.
I was watching a Georgetown game online recently. I couldn't believe how empty it was. Like
Yeah.
that, the years I played there, like that place was full almost every game. Like it was an awesome community to play in, and maybe it's part like all these smaller centers are growing so much too. Like Georgetown's, I don't even recognize it when I drive into it now, and maybe just the demographics are changing, the size of these places are changing, so they've lost a little bit maybe of that smaller town community hockey feel where everybody go. You got nothing else to do, so go watch Georgetown play on Saturday, right? But I think you're right that the crowds have changed.
Yeah, I always remember like in Georgetown's rink, like the one section behind the net, I always remember that being packed. And like then I would watch, as you
Exactly.
said, you watch videos and it's like just you just see the empty seats. But so after your 5 year career in the OPJHL, you end up going the NCAA road, as we mentioned, to Oswego. Um, I have to say, for someone who didn't know a lot about Oswego when I transferred there, looking back, I wish I had played 4 years there because it was so underrated in terms of hockey, how you were treated, the rink. Um, obviously the extracurricular activities were fun too, as we know. But what ended up led you to that decision to go to Oswego? You mentioned guys playing there before, and then how was your experience there?
Yeah, well, like you asked about the D1, I really wasn't getting much D1 interest. But like everybody in D3 I was hearing from, right? So I guess I started, although I was holding out hope, I really just started to realize probably that D3 might be the way. And I started actually, had some other Canadian school opportunities and was trying to decide between those options. And then uh none of the D3 really kind of got me excited until I still remember actually Joe Cardarelli. the coach is Cortland now. I was the assistant coach at Oswego, and when he talked to me after a game at Georgetown, I mean, right away, it just was like, okay. Like I kind of honestly probably made my decision right then because I knew Stroda and Rosie and Joe Carib, so I really looked up to because he was an amazing defenseman. These guys were there. Scotty Irwin was there, or at least he was going to be going there because he had transferred from Southern Maine to Oswego. But so it kind of caught my attention right away, and went on the visit, and as you know, it's such a cool place, and because it had that fan support, like I went to a game and yeah, it wasn't Michigan or anything, but it had the same feel that I was looking for. It had the crowds, it had the feeling of, hey, you know what, you're a big fish in a small pond. You felt a little bit special, and what you're doing mattered. So um, I was pretty sold.
Yeah. One thing I think that's like really important for at least hockey players, I would say when they go to a school, doesn't matter D1 or D3, is there's no American football there because that's normally the first sport. And for like Oswego, there wasn't. So like hockey was everything, as you said. You were a big fish in a small pond. Everyone around town, like the town rallied around that team. Everyone knew who you were. Obviously there was like deals with things if you needed like a TV or something, like they'd help you out on stuff like that. Like, I'm just saying, like it really like it is D3 hockey, but at the same time, it was like you felt like you were at Michigan or Maine or wherever, North Dakota, and one of the cool things that you got to do, and we mentioned this off camera, was playing that old rink. I've seen pictures of it. I've heard about the famous games there, and just like looking at pictures and seeing how the fans were on top of you. It literally looks like a massive barn, and the reality of it was. But to maybe talk about the atmosphere there, and maybe hosting games, like Plattsburgh and kind of derbies like that.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of getting tingles thinking about it because it was so unique and cool. Like that, the rink probably had seating for like 1,500 max, but there are routinely over 2,000 people in there. So, and when Plattsburgh came to town, it was always like a mad dash to make sure your family could get tickets because the eventually, the fire department was going to shut it down and weren't going to let any more people in. So, like there's a little bit of stress, like, oh my God, like my mom and dad got to get in, or my girlfriend or whatever, right? So, they had the band going. The glass was probably about 8 feet tall, so people are leaning over it, and the baseball team would always be right where we came out of the dressing room, and we used to uh, everybody would throw in like $5 because beer's pretty cheap in Oswego, and we'd buy the baseball team a keg, and the whole deal was they had to drink it and then they had to come to the game. So you had stuff like that going on, which was really really kind of neat and cool. But the one tradition that I think is really too bad that doesn't exist anymore is when you guys have the whiteout weekend now with Plattsburgh. Uh, Now, did you play in any bagel games? Did you guys throw the bagels?
No, that was they talked about like the people who broadcast the game would talk about like the tennis ball situation and then the bagel situation, but we never
Yeah.
unfortunately had that.
So what happened was when Plattsburgh came to Oswego, the first goal that Oswego scored in the game, the whole crowd would throw bagels on the ice. And some of them they freeze the bagels and they'd be trying to hit Plattsburgh players with frozen bagels and it was kind of like feed the birds, right? Was sort of the idea. And then the league just sort of said, okay, this is fine. We let it go. Tradition's pretty cool. The first time when Oswego scores, we'll let it go. We clean up the bagels and then get on with the game. And when we went to Plattsburgh, the reverse was they would throw tennis balls on the ice, because of the color green, right? So you're the goalie's hiding in the net, so because everyone's throwing tennis balls at him, and just such a cool event. But what happened was one time we were at Plattsburgh, and uh, they scored their second goal, and we had some Oswego fans at the game, and they threw a couple tennis balls on the ice because it was allowed to happen one time, but if it happened a second time, it was a bench minor for the home team. So if you get some Oswego fans threw the tennis balls on the ice, Plattsburgh got a bench minor. So they reciprocated when they came to Oswego, and then we got a bench minor because us Plattsburgh fans threw bagels on the ice when they weren't supposed to. So I think after that was when it started to change. I think Eddie and Bob Emery kind of probably talked and said, okay, we don't want these penalties. So then the tradition changed.
Two absolutely legendary coaches right there, Bob Emery and Eddie Gosick. Like I was looking at your roster, like some guys that obviously stand out to me was like Whitehead there, like everyone talked about him, and then obviously the goalie Ryan Scott. He came back, I believe my junior year. He came back to like do finish up some schooling or do his master's, and was like kind of like our volunteer assistant or goalie coach. Sorry, so he talked about his days, and obviously he ended his career the right way there, winning a national championship. But after you ended up staying there 2 years, and I was just kind of curious, like what ended up happening there, and you ended up going the pro route after that.
Well, because I had all those courses from at Laurier before we go, and then I went to high school at a time. I was one of the last couple years that had the grade 13 OAC credits. So they accepted all those as college courses too. So I actually graduated in 2 years. So I was a kind of a crossroads of after my second year, what am I going to do? No, I did fast track a little bit. Like I was taking extra courses. I had kind of going back to when I feeling a little left out when all my buddies were planning to go to university. I just had this thing in my mind. I wanted to graduate at the same time they did. For whatever reason, that was meaningful to me at the time. So by graduating in 2 years at Oswego, I graduated the same time all my friends were graduating from university. So now I had this sort of decision to make of what I'm going to do. So I actually thought I was going to go do my master's at the University of Ottawa. That was my plan. Then I found out late, like in the summer, that I actually was not accepted because they looked at my transcript and they said, "Well, you're 6 courses short. Like you've included 6 high school courses on your transcript as university level courses. Those original 6 that Oswego accepted." So that fell apart on me kind of last minute, and that's when I decided, okay, well, we'll try this Southern Pro Hockey League deal, see what that's all about.
And let's talk about your experience there. I have played 2 weekends there. It was kind of in between my Europe stints, and I have to say, going there with a best buddy made it better. And I do can honestly say this, like I never had any intention of playing in that league. I said I would rather retire, and I went there and played, and it actually was fun for the 2 weeks I was there. I think I got lucky because we had our shortest bus trip, which was still 6 hours, both weekends I was there. So I didn't have to do any 14 hours through the night or anything like that. But how was your experience, in the SPHL that year?
It was interesting. I mean, I had 2 stints I was in Richmond for the Richmond Renegades. They were an expansion team, so they were brand new. They had hired John Brophy to be their coach. So John Brophy used to coach the Leafs in the 80s. He's a legendary personality. He's actually the person that they based the character of Reggie Dunlop in Slapshot off of John Brophy. And at this point, Brophy's like 70 years old, maybe older, completely out of his mind. They hired him as kind of a publicity stunt because he used to coach Richmond's rival back in like the 70s. So they wanted him on the bench and just to get bums in the seats and stuff like that. So that in itself was a really interesting experience, just playing for him and some of the the act that he brought with him. So that was I can't say that was always fun, but it was always interesting. And I'm actually very glad I had the chance to spend some time with John Brophy and experience him as a coach. And yeah, like the bus trips there, you had the sleeper bus, the long bus rides. I think I only played, I think, 11 regular season games. And I want to say, I feel like half of them were probably all in Fayetteville. It just so happened that that was the schedule, and I just played majority of my games there. But Richmond was really cool. The Richmond Coliseum we played in was seated like 7,000, and we were getting over 5,000 pretty much every game. It had this big cannon when you scored, and it, similar to like the Oswego experience. Like the people in Richmond, like they just, you were a big fish in a small pond too. Like you might as well have been in the NHL to them, right? And so that was kind of neat. But probably the coolest thing is not even a hockey story. It's back then the WWE was doing their Sunday Night Raw things, and so they had the pay-per-view Sunday Night Raw hosted at our rink, and So all the wrestlers came in, used our dressing room and everything, but we had access to the underground parking and we could get in and watch watch the wrestling. So we could see the pre-match press conferences where the wrestlers are going crazy and then like they cut and then they're all kind of hugging and laughing and high-fiving and seeing some of that behind the scenes. And then like the big show rolling into Denny's at 3 in the morning with all his bodyguards, which are half his size, and just some kind of neat things like that.
It's funny our similarities and stories, man. The like I played in Fayetteville, so I know that rink. Like you mentioned, they treated you as if you were an NHL guy. It was crazy. Like I remember signing autographs and being like, "You do realize like this is going to get you no money, right? Like this means nothing." And then as you said, in the 2 weeks I was there, we hosted Monday Night Raw, and I just went to it because I was like, as a kid, you have that fandom growing up, and I remember going there and like there's like 1,500 people there maybe, and like the wrestlers are acting like, oh, the great crowd out here, and you're just like, you know what I mean? So it's just like that was kind of funny. But back to your kind of career there. So after Richmond, I believe you retired and you transitioned to, which I think is a cool job because to be honest, I don't even know all the full responsibilities, but you end up going to Canisius College there as the athletic director, I believe, or director of hockey operations, if I remember correctly, or at least that's what however it's phrased on Elite Prospect. But like, how did that job opportunity come about, and like, what was kind of like your day-to-day responsibilities, I would say?
So when I decided to go to the SP, I decided that it didn't matter how great or how terrible this experience went. I was gonna do it for 1 year. It was just an itch I wanted to scratch. And then I was gonna go to Canisius. I wanted to get the a Master of Science in Education in Phys Ed at Canisius. I thought that I would probably end up being a phys ed teacher, return to Ontario, and like I don't know, coach the Blades or the Cougars or the Raiders or somebody like that was sort of what I thought I would do. And uh, one of the people that flirted with me from Division 1 was Dave Smith, who was coaching at Canisius. When he coached at Miami, he had sent me a letter. So uh, I reached out to Dave Smith and I said, "Hey, I'm coming to Canisius. I'd like to be your graduate assistant coach because the graduate assistant coach position came with free tuition, a small stipend of money as well." And I thought that would be great. And he said, "Well, TJ, that's awesome, but I already have a graduate assistant coach. Uh, but you're welcome to be involved with the program." So I went and met with him, and I don't know what happened on Elite Prospects. It's got me a much better title now. Like the actual title at the time was student manager, which I hated that title with a passion. But there was uh, like NCAA rules that at the time that had to be the title. So basically, what I was I supported the coaching staff primarily through a lot of video. I became I'm up in the press box and on game day, hammering the keys. I'm putting together the pre-scouts. I'm communicating with the other team's grad assistants and hockey ops people. In those days, you had to burn a DVD of your game and put it in the mail, and you had to put it in the mail by Monday at noon so that it would arrive by Wednesday so that that team had a chance to review it. So you're like on the phone with the other hockey ops guy, like, "Hey, did you put it in the mail?" "Yeah, yeah, put it in the mail." "Okay, all right, good." And so like that was that year, and that was unbelievable. That's like where I really learned the professional side of coaching and what goes into organizing a staff and organizing a practice and how it all fits together. And that was a really influential time in my life. And fortunately, my second year, I got the graduate assistant position because Greg Fargo, who had the role, had moved on, and he, you know, has had a great coaching career. He's coaching pro right now in women's game with New York, and he's been at Colgate for a while as a head coach, and Elmira before that. So he was a great friend and a great coach, and just a cool. It was just a really fun experience the 2 years I spent there.
Well, minus the shitty title the first year, I would say like kind of what you said, like it's like getting your foot in the door, and it probably taught you so much and helped grow your knowledge of whether it was like making a pre-scout or as you said, like everyone's at some point, I think any coach has been a video coach in a sense at times, like learning how to do it and what they like. And it allows you to kind of build your formula as a coach. Like, what would I use if I was the head guy one day? Would I take this piece here, take this piece here? And that's also goes into learning from the coaches you worked with. You fortunately, I'm going to say fortunately, because it's always a pleasure to be able to work or coach Burlington guys. You coached Corey Conacher, who obviously as a year older than me, I grew up with and went on to have a good NHL career, and now himself has got into I believe the agency business and owns a junior B team. But him and Carl Hudson, I played pro with my first year in France, and I remember working out with him in the summer. I was so happy every day when that guy would not come to practice, which was rare because his shot would break my hand every time. This guy had a cannon. How was it coaching those two guys?
Well, coaching would be a loose term, and for me, more so uh, just engaging with them in a friendly way and supporting them through video when I could. And but yeah, Corey was special from the beginning. You know, he unfortunately broke his wrist early in his freshman season, so he didn't play until December. But I believe he's got like a December birthday. So he was the youngest player in college hockey that year. He didn't turn 18 until December, but as soon as he was healthy, he was immediately an impact. He was just so dynamic, skilled, and fast, and shifty, and played his head up and scored goals and made plays. Like he was exceptional. And yeah, I mean Heidi's shot, like what a bomb! And such a character guy. I'm glad you brought him up. I haven't thought about him in a long time. He's really really a great guy, and probably would have been a lot of fun to be around as a teammate.
Yeah, definitely a great Sunday fun day guy. And the funny thing was, he would have a great time, but he would be in the gym the next day at 6 a.m. and it would look like nothing happened the day before. So a lot of respect for him and his work ethic. Like he really, gave it his all in all areas, I would say. So I was happy I got to play with him, and he ended up having a good pro career over in Europe. After Canisius there, you end up going to SUNY-Fredonia, as we mentioned off camera. Um, we would have been, or sorry, I was at that time. I had been at Oswego, so we talked off camera about us coming to Fredonia and it being really tight games, and obviously the fan support you guys got when we were there. But how were those 3 years for you? At Fredonia, and kind of maybe talk about like the difference that you had seen versus being at Canisius to Fredonia.
Well, the way I look at it is at Canisius, I learned about the science of coaching. Like like Smitty, Dave Smith is he's always on the cutting edge of, what's new, whether it be technology wise, how can he better organize things? He's always looking to optimize. He's got the newest app on the phone for scouting or like whatever it might be. He has a true process for how you pre-scout and how you do certain things. And so I really learned a lot. A lot of templates and frameworks to follow in my experience there that I was able to take to Fredonia because Jeff Meredith was I wouldn't say the opposite, just different. Like what I learned at Fredonia was the art of coaching, where Jeff was so good with people and motivating and sort of crafting a program and like a family sort of atmosphere around the whole thing. And I'm so grateful for the responsibility he gave to me because he just it was like day one, okay, you got the power play, you got the D, uh, and basically I shaped I shouldn't say all, but like I had an impact on all most of the 5-on-5 systems as well. And he listened and he gave me responsibility and I really got that trial and error opportunities as a coach to try things, fail, succeed, and stuff like that. And I still remember we're at Elmira early in the season, and we call a timeout, pull the goalie, and he hands me the whiteboard, and I'm looking at him going, What do you want me to do with this?" And he's like, "It's your timeout," and I fumbled my way through it. I still remember I'm drawing guys' numbers on the board that aren't even on the ice. It wasn't very efficient. And later I was rattled. I said, Jeff, I love that. I want to do that, but like, give me a heads up. I'll be ready next time. I was disappointed in myself, but that's just an example of the type of opportunity you get when you work with Jeff Merritt. He really empowers his assistants, and you see where if you do a deep dive on who all his assistants were and where they've gone, they've all basically become head coaches, and I think that's a credit to Jeff and how he builds his program.
Speaking of becoming a head coach, as you mentioned, you would do just that. So after those 3 years there in Fredonia, you were getting the head coaching job at Curry College. Did you feel you were ready to take on that challenge when that opportunity came?
Oh yeah, I felt ready. But then you get in the seat and you got to figure it out, right? I was confident, and I think when you're young, like at the time, I was the youngest head coach in the NCAA when I got that job, and I think it's a little bit of ignorance but also I don't know, not stubbornness, but like you have real clear values. I don't think you've been through enough battles and wars to understand there's a lot of gray area in this thing that we do. And things were black and white to me. Like I was very clear on what I wanted. I was very clear on what I believed in, what was going to fly at Curry, what wasn't going to fly, and how we were going to build this culture and my team and all this stuff. And so I went in there with confidence and a plan. And as this job will do, there were moments of, especially early on, like I guess humbleness, like you maybe don't have some success when you want, or it didn't come as quickly as you want. You learn lessons. Fortunately, I stuck around long enough there that we built the program into something really strong. It's still flourishing today under Pete Roundy. He's doing a great job, but that program when I left it, I was really proud. So when I like, I was comfortable leaving at the time I did because I'm like, I left this in a much better place than I found it.
No, that's exactly. I was gonna say that because even in D3, like when I was playing, like I don't think Curry was a stronger team in that division. And then I remember like another Burlington guy, Phil Kiss, went there and you know seemed to have a good time there. And as you said, you guys had success and you were becoming a top team every year and like help kind of build that foundation up for that program, which is obviously awesome to see. And one thing I thought was cool that you've done in your career too, and like some people might question why, because you had obviously done such a good job as a head coach at Curry, and clearly, you know, I would assume would have had the opportunity to stay there or whatever, but you end up going to Union College as an assistant coach. And I've had guests on who said, sometimes I believe it was JF Hooley from Clarkson who said this, but he was like, sometimes you got to go to the higher level and be an assistant instead of a head coach and just continue to learn, grow as a coach. Um, how was it at Union? My best friend from back home, Josh Juris, played there. He loved his time there when he was there, and I believe Rick Bennett might have still been there when you were there, if I remember correctly. Like he coached Josh as well, but how was it going to a program like that? Because that's a program that literally was about to go D3, whatever it was 15, 10 years ago. And then they built their way up, won a national championship. It's still like a program that a lot of people like to go to and commit to as athletes.
That was a really interesting experience. Yeah, Rick hired me to come to Union, and it was right after COVID, or I guess right after the canceled season of COVID. And so went in there, at the time for me moving, I had two really young boys at the time, my wife, and we were in Boston. We had a great situation. So it was really kind of a leap of faith. And the way I looked at it at the time was, I felt like, you know what, I believe I can be a Division I head coach, but I know there's steps in between, a few steps in between, where I was. And this was a logical step. It was a good league, obviously a historic program, head coach with great experience and sees and kind of operates a little bit differently than I do. So I thought, what a great learning experience it could be for me to go there, learn from Rick, be at this level, uh, prove myself, on the recruiting side of things because there are and certainly were, and I'm not and maybe still are like some real challenges to recruiting to Union. And I thought that this is perfect. Let's go. And so we made the jump and we went, and I was very grateful for that opportunity. And uh, you know, as it turned out, middle of the year, there's situation with Rick where he ended up leaving the program, which then left a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds. And at the same time, you're looking, okay, well, what does this mean? Like, I just moved my family here. We've been here for like 4 months, and what's going to happen? And then that's when Brock University kind of was brought to my attention, and that opportunity progressed rather quickly to the point of having an offer to go to Brock. And the more I learned about Brock, the more it became just absolutely a no-brainer to go. So I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit on your question, but that's what came to mind when you asked me what was that experience like at Union. I guess the other thing I would say, which was really a defining moment for me, was that I was brought in to coach the penalty kill and the D. So like I had really good penalty kills at Curry, and it was a shortened season the year before with COVID, but we were 100%. Like we didn't get scored on once in the shortened season on the kill. But I found out when you play against teams with NHL draft picks, and sometimes the system doesn't matter. They just make a play, and now you're realizing like, wow, okay, you got to do some things at higher levels a little differently. Like you've really got to force them to use their option B. Like don't let option A beat you. Force them to option B or make things a little, try to make you can't. Rob Bentivegna runs the PK at Brock now. What he always says is he's like, we're not trying to prevent all the shots. We can't. So let's just prevent the hard ones and give up the predictable ones to help our goalie. So those are some of the lessons you learn when you start playing against some high end players. That was really cool that I had at that point not experienced.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And like just myself being a goalie, I remember like some coaches who ran the penalty kill were like telling their guys like you got to run around, get in every shot lane, like blah blah. And like sometimes I would be like, guys, let them shoot from there. Like I got it. You know what I mean? Like they would end up being more of a screen for me than the actual guy who's
Hmm.
shooting because it just like what you kind of brought up, like the percentages or whether it's a grade A area or a grade C area. So that's definitely very true in penalty killing. Um, Talking about your jump to Brock there, like as I mentioned to you as well off camera. You obviously are in your third season there, and I think it's really awesome and maybe a testament to you as a coach. You end up going there, and within 24 months, you end up winning Coach of the Year and having the best season in program history. Excuse me. Um, Maybe talk about that, like maybe the philosophies you try to have as a coach, and like maybe what evidently you think helped you guys have the success you did last season. You evidently winning the Coach of the Year award.
Well, I learned from my experience at Curry. That was one thing. Like when you take over a new program as a head coach, I think especially at the collegiate level where it's truly a program and you have players for 4 years or roughly 4 years, that you got to be careful because there's this feeling that you want to put your stamp on the culture, right? You want to make it your team. You have to be careful that you don't inadvertently tear anything down that that stunts your progress. So, which I think I did do at Curry. Like I went into Curry and I sort of just changed everything immediately. I didn't take any time to figure out what should stay and what needs to go. Right? I just said, no, I'm changing everything. And I think looking back on it, that probably slowed my progress initially there. So I was a little more patient and I took more time at Brock to figure out what are the real points of pride here. What are the things in this program that the players and the stakeholders really appreciate and value? And let's make sure we uphold those and really value them. And then just slowly just pay attention to what needs to be pushed or pulled or tweaked. I'm very fortunate that I inherited a team that had talent. Like we had some really good players on that team. So I knew I could win some games. That first year was just about structure. I just wanted to put in a structure, not just like on the ice in terms of systems, but in terms of our program. Like, what does it look day to day, week to week? That was a part of the program that was lacking. So, like making sure that our team workouts, our team meetings, our practice habits, our practice schedule and structure, and how we prepared for games, and all these things needed to be put in place. So when I look back, that first year was just about creating an organization and some structure. And the guys, they flourished, and we had a really great start, had a really good season overall. And then the next year, basically everybody kind of came back. So we had guys, we had the oldest team in the country. We had a guy turn 28 during the season. We had a guy turn 27 during the season. Our captain was his third year wearing the C. So we had leadership, we had maturity, we had a real savvy team that now had some structure to work inside of. And then we brought in Connor Unger, who was our goalie, played for us for 1 year. He had played in the Western Hockey League. He played 1 year and then signed. He signed with Edmonton about 10 minutes after the end of our season. So obviously he had an impact on our year, but we also had a ton of great players. I mean, like Jacob Roach was a two-time league MVP, two-time All-Canadian. So, and we had a whole cast of other characters that were really good. So, uh, I think it was structure, recruiting, optimizing. Like it wasn't like an overhaul needed to happen. It just needed to be properly run.
And naturally, having two great people from Burlington on your coaching staff as well, with Rob Bentavania this year, and then Adrian Volpe, as I mentioned, the goalie coach, my
Yes.
goalie partner going up. You just got to give the Burlington boys around. His success seems to follow us. No, just kidding. But speaking of the kind of your team there, like I'm always curious, someone who takes over a program, what types of players are you looking to recruit, and maybe like what type of culture or image are you trying to instill that this is Brock Badgers hockey?
We have to take into account sort of the wider factors too. And you got to know the terrain. And it takes a while. It takes at least a year to figure out the terrain you're working under. So like what are the values of the university at a whole? Like what are the values of the community you're in the region? And and how does that shape the identity of the team, right? And so you take some time to figure that out. And you also empower the players as well. You find out from them, like like who do you think we are? Who do you think we should be? And you work together to craft what that vision looks like. And then you're working together in lockstep to take steps in that direction, right? The one thing that we talk about at Brock is we just want to be the best Brock team ever. That's our goal. There's been some great Brock teams, and so last year I feel like we accomplished that. We most wins in program history. We went to the national quarterfinals. Unfortunately, we ran into University of New Brunswick, who won every single game they played last year and went on like 50 or 60 in a row over the course of 3 seasons. So that was a tough matchup, but really proud of how we played in that game. And I thought we made everybody proud. So uh, I used to think when I first started that like you could create like a binder for your season and then just open it up in August the next year and just rinse and repeat. And what I've learned is that that's not the case at all. It's what this team needs at this time, and you're really day to day, week to week. You have a vision that you're working toward, of course, but you're taking many steps every single day.
That's very true. I don't think there, as you mentioned, I don't think there's a manual for coaching seasons. Like everyone talks about, oh yeah, I do this and this, but it's like you kind of got to go with what's working, maybe what's not, make adjustments, go with. You also have to manage, which I think this is sometimes forgotten, is I don't know how big the roster is there, but let's just say it's 25 guys. Like not everyone's the same and not everyone can be coached the same. Like you have to manage 25 adults One guy might be able to get pushed more. One guy might have to be left alone a little bit in certain areas. So this is something that's always changing every year. And you as a coach, at the end of the day, it lands in your lap, and you have to learn, you know, basically how to do it, and hopefully you learn quick, and then it brings you success, because there's some people that might not learn quick enough, and it doesn't. But one other cool thing I thought you
Good
did,
point.
which I have to say is awesome. You coached at the international level. So you coached Team Hungary there, 2 times, and I believe the first year, you guys ended up winning uh, the gold medal to go up to the next division. So you guys started at the U18s there for Team Hungary. You guys started in D1B. First year you win, and you go up to D1A, and you end up coaching that team the next year. Like, obviously yourself being a Canadian coaching Team Hungary, that wouldn't be the first place that I thought you would go. But how was that experience for you? How did the opportunity come about? And obviously, how was it, winning that first year and getting promoted?
I mean, those 2 years are some of my favorite memories of fun, adventure, learning, everything. Uh, I'll start with how it came about because I think it's relevant for the coaching journey and how opportunities come. And I I had recently at Curry recruited the first European player I had ever coached. Leo Moran, who's now working at Miami, Ohio, was the club head coach at Ohio University for a few years, did a great job. He's Swiss. So I recruited him. And I remember thinking, okay, this is my first European player. Like, however this goes is probably going to shape my opinion fairly or unfairly on if I want any more. Well, the story I can tell you about Leo is that like 3 years later, I had like a third of my roster were Europeans. So it went really well with Leo. Like he's one of my all-time favorite players. You mentioned one of the other ones, Phil Kiss. He's also on that short list of all-time favorite players. But I started diving into this European market. It was also a strategic advantage. Like in Boston, where Curry was, it's a beautiful private school and everything else. It's in a great location, but we're surrounded by some really high academic institutions. And when you're a private school with a high price point, and you're kind of in this world where you're sort of competing with some of them. So like the American and certainly the New England people, their perception of the Curry education was not as high as say like some of the NESCACs or other really good schools in Boston. So I found we were losing some players in that battle. And at the time, right early on, we didn't have a great hockey reputation. Like it was solid, but it wasn't like it is now, I don't think. And so we were losing the hockey decisions to like UMass Boston, for example, at the time was really strong. So we were losing some players to teams like that, and so so I found this European niche as a real opportunity. And I found once you have one or two, it got a lot easier to get more because they start feeling comfortable. They go, oh wow, there's somebody similar to me on this team, and so I dove right in. And so I received an email from a player named Zoli Iros. He's a Hungarian player, and he had interest in Curry. And I looked at his list of references, and there's two guys' names are Hungarian that I couldn't read, and then one guy's name was Glenn Williamson. I'm like, who's this Glenn? So I look him up, and he had coached with the Winnipeg Jets. He's coached all over the world. He was a scout with LA Kings. I'm like, well, man, well, I got to call this guy. So I called Glenn, and I caught him. He's at like a coffee shop in Budapest at the time, and we ended up talking for an hour. I think he just wanted to really talk to a North American hockey coach, but we talked a long time. And that was looking back, one of the most influential phone calls I've ever made because so Zoli ended up coming to Curry. So did Glenn's son, Jordy, who ended up being my captain. And Glenn has become a great friend and a mentor for me in my life. And so he was influential in us then taking Curry to Hungary for a trip. We brought the team there. We played some pro teams. We actually played in Slovakia as well in Nitra, and uh, we just had an unbelievable experience. And when I was over there, I got to know some of the Hungarian coaches. And so then you fast forward a little bit, and that relationship had flourished. And what Glenn had done so well with the Hungarian coaches was he was taking them and putting them in spots to learn. So they take him and go put him with like Willie Desjardins in the Western League or Mike Johnston in the Western League and spend a week shadowing, learning, and having these experiences that they could take back to Hungary with them. And we talk about this, and I thought, what a great idea. So Ben Schwaznek, so Schwazi, the head coach of the U18 team, was somebody that I became friends with. We started talking, say, I'd love to do that with you. Could I come spend a week with you guys? And we're looking at the dates, like when could it happen? Well, the only time my schedule would allow would be during like around the World Championships. I said, well, if you're going to come, why don't we just put you on the coaching staff and don't just come and watch, like come and coach. I said, perfect. So I go and yeah, so the first one was in Oswego, Italy, which is on top of a mountain in Italy, and it's just beautiful, such a cool place. And we end up winning gold, and uh, to be to be around that team winning gold in the celebration, uh, like it was so special. I remember thinking, I don't know why it took me this long to figure it out, but I remember thinking, wow, this is how I would feel if I won with Team Canada. And it's like, well, no kidding, right? Like they just won the world championship for their level. And it was such a special experience to be there with them, to contribute in a small way. I also learned how to open a beer with a hockey stick, which, believe it or not, I had never seen before in my entire life. It took a Hungarian to teach me. And just an incredible experience. And then to go back the next year in France and stay. Like Hungary had gone up to the A pool in the past when Glenn coached them, but they hadn't ever stayed at that point. So to go up the next year and actually stay at that level, not be relegated back down, was also a huge accomplishment, which then they did again last year. And so credit goes to Schwasi and the coaching staff that he puts together, because they're incredible.
It goes back to the old saying, I think, of it's all about who you know and right time, right place kind of thing. And it sounds like, you know, you starting from something such as a small idea led to all these connections, and obviously you getting 2 years with a great experience of coaching a national team and obviously winning gold. Funny thing when you talk about the hockey stick thing with the beer, like in Germany, they all use water bottles to open the beer, and like forever I couldn't do it. And then I remember doing it and being like, okay, I'm German, I can get my passport now. I figured it out. Like it's just like it's such a random, pointless accomplishment, but you feel so good. So like that made me think of that right away. Couple more for you here. Obviously, we've been going at this for about an hour. It's been awesome to talk to you. Um, do you have any, I would say, like personal goals, like maybe something you want to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's at Brock or like for you personally, like do you want to keep rising if you can, or are you just kind of taking each challenge as they come?
Yeah, well, I think right now I'm just so focused on Brock. Like when I took the job, I felt that we're positioned in a way that if we do this right, we can be a national contender every season. And so far, I still feel that way 2.5 years in. So that's a really good sign. And that's my goal. I want to get us to the point where when you're talking about U Sports hockey, uh, Brock Badgers are one of the first names that come off your lips when you talk about Canadian university hockey. And that's possible for sure. So we're working towards that. That's my number one goal. I do have a real thirst for like the Hungarian thing, like that, like the adventure of it, the personal growth, the career growth, like that kind of stuff really interests me. The opportunity to get to Europe, and I've gotten to Europe like probably every year for the last 6, 7 years. I've gotten over to Europe for some type of experience, whether it be a camp or like last year, going to the WIHF coaching symposium and taking in some world championship games in Prague. So I really enjoy that. Like that excites me. That gets and it invigorates me and gives me new ideas. And I think it's really cool to learn. Like like you can go to a country like Hungary and learn things and become a better coach because they're doing great things too, right? And then just being more aware of the world and other people and things like so that stuff really is is cool. So I guess my outside sort of personal goals would be to just keep finding opportunities that sort of get me excited about learning, about improvement, about seeing the world, and if I combining that with hockey, like and then that fires me up for what I'm doing at Brock.
Hopefully, I'll see you over here in summer 2027 for the World Championships. Germany's got them, and Mannheim actually is one of the two cities where it's going to be. So maybe we'll cross paths there. We talked about this off camera, and I think it's a great way to transition to it. Kind of the new rules that have come in when in terms of eligibility for major junior players with NCAA and stuff. Like, how does that like affect you sports in a sense with recruiting, or do you think it, like to me, it's like you're now gonna have to battle against something you wouldn't have to battle before, which before it was like as we mentioned, it was hey, you're either going major junior or you're going NCAA. Like those are your paths. Like, how do you think it's gonna change the recruiting process for you guys?
Well, I think the reality is that uh, probably this time next year, majority of the players in the Canadian Hockey League will be committed to NCAA schools. So it's limiting what was for a long time uh, the biggest and most important player pool for our level. So it's just going to shift. But at the same time, what's also happening is there's going to be a lot of tier two players that would have had the chance to play Division One hockey that won't now. They're still great players, right? There's still NCAA players that are going to return home for various reasons. So I'm really curious to see, a couple years down the road, how this all shapes out. And but there's no doubt that it's making it a little more challenging. Like there's because most of it's just uncertainty, right? When you talk to people, everybody's not quite sure. Like, what does this mean? What's going on? It's fundamentally changing the player development model in North America completely. I think for the best players, this is really good. I don't know if it's actually creating more opportunities. I think it's probably creating less opportunities for the second tier and everyone else. And I'm curious from a player development standpoint, like if you think about minor hockey and the idea of you want as many players playing for as long as possible, have the biggest pool of players, because you're not quite sure which ones are going to emerge. Like when I was 10 years old playing with Jason Spezza, it's pretty clear he was a special player, but there's no guarantee that he was going to continue. Now he did, but there's a whole bunch of other players that were as good that you wouldn't know their name now, and a bunch of other guys that couldn't make teams that had 1,000-year career NHL games, right? So where I'm getting at with this is if the best players are going to go to CHL and then the NCAA, that's one cohort of players. We used to have two cohorts of players, the ones that would go to the NCAA and the ones that would go to CHL. So I'm just curious, 5 years from now, do we have more or do we have less great North American hockey players? I think that's the thing I'm wondering about.
I have to say this is like one of my most fascinations right now. Like I'm so curious how it plays out in 5 to 10 years. And one guest brought up this point, and I thought it was such a good point. Was right now hockey, but I mean, at the time he said this, the rule hadn't gone through yet, so now it's gone through. But we used to be such a unique sport because we had 3 to 4 avenues for players to get to whether it was the NHL or wherever. You had the major junior route, you had the NCAA route, you had the European route, and then you would have, maybe the guys who it's either U Sports or they played tier two junior, worked their way up through pro, like whatever it was. Whereas football and basketball, it's like you get a scholarship, play NCAA, and then you go to the NBA or you're maybe go to Europe or you're like, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't the 4 different pools or 3 different pools of like where you could recruit from as far as like the NHL goes and the higher pro leagues. So as you mentioned, I don't know if it makes it better. And as you said, like a lot of OHL or major junior guys are going to go NCAA, and that's going to kick out a lot of kids who are very good players in tier two junior from getting these spots that normally they should get and getting these early commitments. And, maybe that's where your strategy becomes is, hey, we got to focus more on these leagues for recruiting and finding these guys. And, obviously great hockey in Canadian university, and you guys have school as well. So, and a lot of times it's cheaper than in the States. So that's a benefit, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yell that from the mountaintop.
So, yeah.
It's especially now with the Canadian dollar, it's about it's almost 50%. So uh yeah, that's a limiting factor. Like it's gonna change everything, right? Like you talk about D3, uh, is that gonna become predominantly American? Is it gonna be close, is it gonna be 90, 100% Americans? And are Canadians gonna stay home? I'm curious, does this really localize hockey? Like we see all these, like the most, I forget the exact percentages, so some D1 guy can call in and correct it. But let's say like 50% of the players going to Division One are from Ontario. But of that 50%, like 45% of it they're committing from leagues outside of Ontario. Like they're not staying in Ontario to play. But now with these rules, are they going to stay in these? Are they going to stay? What's the point? Do you have to go to BC to get your scholarship now? Or are you going to stay home? Are Canadians going to stay home to go to university if they're not getting a scholarship? There's just so many downstream potential consequences that I don't think any of us have truly, aren't aware of what could happen in a few years, in the next few years.
And a lot of schools too, like, playing in the OHL or the major junior, one of the benefits is like whatever the rule is, every year you play, you get your school paid for. Well, that's not going to count for NCAA. And they only have like a lot of schools, obviously the top ones are in a different level, but there's a lot of schools where it's like, hey, we have 25 guys on our roster and we can only give out 12 full rides each year. So there's guys that are going to have to pay for the school. And as you mentioned, with the dollar value and everything. And one thing that happened to me when I was at Oswego was, as you know, Oswego's like there's no athletic scholarships for D3. I had a full ride at Niagara and I left it. And when I went to Oswego, they had this like international student program thing, and it basically gave you percentage off the price, which was great. So all the Canadian guys got it. Maybe someone like yourself had it too. I don't know. But when I went there that year, they said, "Yeah, this is the last year we're doing this." So then like the burden obviously fell on my parents, right? Like I had 2 more years left of school and I just transferred and it was like, okay, does he have to leave again? Does he go back to CAS and sit a year? Like it was, luckily for me, I had a family that could do it, but there's a lot of people that wouldn't be able to do it. So that part of it too makes me very interesting because all these kids are going to come from the OHL after playing 3, 4 years and be like, yeah, well, you guys should give me a full ride. And these schools are going to be like, well, unfortunately, we can't do that till year 2 or 3 and blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to create more controversy, right?
Well, that's just it, right? I mean, if you hear like, okay, you get 3 for 4 or whatever. Okay, great. That sounds awesome. But that one year you got to pay for it might be 60,000 US. So do you got $90,000 sitting around to Canadian dollars to go for one year of school?
I haven't hit that jackpot yet.
Yeah, how many families do, right? So that's lots to be determined, man. I'm really curious as everybody else is how it's all gonna go. But nevertheless, you can't fight it. It's happened and this is where it is, and we're gonna lean into it, right? And you gotta find, I think every coach, every league is trying to figure out now where do they fit? How do you remain viable and attractive? And there's gonna be opportunities out of this. Some people are gonna be able to emerge and grab their market share, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very curious, intrigued to see where this goes. Last one for you here. I always like to end the podcast with this question here. What is one piece of advice or multiple piece of advice you'd give the younger generation out there?
Sometimes you have to work incredibly hard with no guarantee of success. That would be the one. I think that everybody wants a guarantee. Yeah, I'll do it if I know that I'm going to get something out of it or whatever. But you just have to go for it and give it everything you got. And probably if you do that, it's going to work out in some way that it's meant to. But even if it doesn't, you've just done something with all of your might, and you're going to gain the rewards from having gone through that experience.
I would have to say that's like probably one of the better answers because like I just think of your career, for example, you took a in a sense a position to hopefully get a graduate assistant position to hopefully get a coaching position. And it's like if you had went to Canisius, for example, at the time and be like, hey, I'll do this, but you got to guarantee me that next year you pay me as an assistant or something. Like it's like they'd be like, well, there's no guarantee there. Like if like you got to earn it. And that's why I always like to talk to people about is it kind of like earning it, maybe biting the bullet early on and doing things for less money or little money to get your foot in the door. And it's about just kind of getting your name out there and building up your resume. And someone like yourself has done that. And look at the career you've had, man. Like, I don't think if you look back and say, yeah, 10, 15 years ago, you'd picture where you are now and have a nice trophy to your name too with coach of the year. Like, it's honestly pretty impressive to see.
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but I'm only about halfway through it.
For sure. You got plenty of years left, so I'm very curious to see where you go and definitely be following Brock hockey. And we'll have to get your assistant there, Benty, to come on for an episode. Maybe I could get some stories out of him.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you got it. He's the man.
But I thank TJ. I thank you for doing this, taking the time and going down memory lane for with us. I hope it was good to do that. You definitely shared some great advice, and as I said, best of luck this season.
Yeah, thanks you, Andrew. I appreciate you doing this, and it's a great resource for anyone who's trying to figure out their way through the industry. And uh, it was actually a lot of fun. Brought up some memories I haven't thought about in a long time. So thank you.
I bet you haven't thought about bagels on the ice in a long time. So,
I had not.
but, yeah, thanks again. And for those listening, give Brock a follow online on all the social platforms. If you're ever in that area, come out to a game. Obviously, U Sports Hockey. It's great hockey to watch too. Obviously, Brock's got a good team and continuing to be a top team in the league. And until next week, choose and ciao.